phone, parishioner, and asked me, are the priests are doing not being able to do anything? You know, so I thought, well, the prayer tonight will reflect that. Sorry. For the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord, give me patience and hurry. Amen. He was happy to hear that we were frustrated. That
well, you made God smile just then.
Yeah. Yeah, just frustrated the Archbishop's not letting us do anything. There's no compromise on it. So.
Well, we're seeing some changes in Europe as well as in Asia and beginning now on the East Coast. And I think as we get a better handle on what the virus can do and how to prevent it and really assess the risks instead of just saying shut down everything, I'm hopeful that we'll approach this with reason and not fear.
What's the doctor's name? Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Fauci?
Someone said today. Well, the NBA can't play until Dr. Fauci says so. Come on. When did he become all-knowing?
Well, there was a news clip of what he had said before. No, he's not a problem getting together, not a problem doing this. And it just shows how little they knew in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's totally contradicted what he said in the beginning. Which, again, my only problem is when people come across it as absolute, whether it be beginning, middle, or end.
Well, at any time in life. But so we pray for patience, but also for humility, perhaps, to realize when if there needs to be a course correction, do it gently, but do it soon.
And I just pray that our bishops stand up and say, Mass and the sacraments are essential. Even if we have to shut it down, having them stand up and say that would help a lot.
But if we don't have a change by May 15th is the next deadline. If they say, okay, another month, June 15th.
Well, we all know, I mean, based upon the latest, which of course can be superseded at any time, we know that there will be some continuing restrictions and observations, and the hand sanitizers and all that are going to be a part of life for a while. And that's a problem, but that's not something that should prevent us from being a sacramental people once again.
Amen.
Or you just see, how long is it going to take for it to return to normal? I don't know, but as soon as it turns hot weather, you see what the beach looks like.
Yeah.
In Newport Beach last weekend, 40,000 people.
And they're a lot closer together than people who are in the pews.
Thank you.
Wait till the kids and the young adults can get back together. Yeah, I think that'll happen sooner rather than later. But anyway, okay, tonight. Just say thank you.
Thank you.
Because I'm right up your alley. The topic is, why should I believe in God?
Okay.
Now, as an Aquinas person, I thought,
well, the reasons for the existence of God, or the why should I believe in God, I guess the way I would characterize the question is, if someone is predisposed to be open to the question of whether God exists, then there are several ways to get into that. But why? Well, let's try that. Why?
I think one precedes the other. First, it should be, why should I believe that God exists?
Okay.
And then when you get to there, that may start to answer the second question, why should I believe?
Mm-hmm.
So why should I believe that God exists?
Well, Father John, you want to start out, or shall I splash in the mud puddle? Okay. Well, I think there are a variety of different reasons, ways to approach it. One is just from the basis of reason and science. Another would be on the basis of your own feelings and intuition as a human being. And I'll just focus on another would be your observations about the nature of human community. Let me just focus on the ones that have to do with reason, because we live in a scientific culture. People want to look at the scientific method. They want to say, okay, prove that God exists. So why should I believe in God? Because I can prove it. Well, that's one way of addressing it. The problem, and we have to get right to the base of what the scientific method is. The scientific method, which is an amazingly powerful instrument, and it's provided us with all the science and the chemistry and all the technology that we have. But it's focused on material things. Almost everyone agrees that God is immaterial, spirit. And so we essentially have a category error if we try to use the scientific method to prove that God exists. Because you can only work on material things. Force, energy, mass, all of the things that our understanding of God from tradition tells us does not exist. God does not matter, is not material. In fact, just to jump ahead a little bit, one of the great gifts of the incarnation, the greatest historical event in human history, is when God became man. But I digress. So, if God is not matter, God is immaterial, then no scientific method experiment can prove that God exists. But do we stop there and say, okay, well, we can't do anything? No, we can still use our reason. One of the things that we can do, and reason shows us, that you look at something like the Big Bang, as little as 60 years ago, most scientists thought that we lived in what's known as a steady state universe, meaning that the universe, to all intents and purposes, was eternal. It had always been, it always would be just the way it is. That's the Aristotelian view of the world from 400 BC. And it really hadn't changed. And then this priest came along, and he did some mathematics and had some observations, and he said, no, it looks like there's this thing, there's an origin where everything started out at this super tiny point, and then everything exploded. And we call that today the Big Bang. And almost all scientists agree that the data support the fact that there was a Big Bang.
Hardly anybody knows that it was a priest who first suggested that. Hardly any.
So now we have this Big Bang, and that raises even more perplexing questions. Because if there was a Big Bang, then there had to have been something, we don't even know, we don't even really have the words to talk about it, something before time, before motion, when there was nothing. And if you look at the Big Bang and you realize that that is not an autonomous event, then it had to have someone who is outside of time and space to say yes, or let it be, or pull a switch, or whatever metaphor you want to use. And that, to me, is a very powerful, intuitive proof that God exists, the creator of all the universe.
I'm with you. One of the big moments years ago when I realized no matter what you believe in God as the creator, if you're an atheist, or if you say, I'm agnostic, there's no way I could know. Every one of those requires an act of faith.
It's true.
Because we can't know what it was like at the beginning. If you want to say, no, I'm atheist, then you're stuck with, okay, even at the Big Bang, there was some kind of material that exploded, something that exploded. Did that have no beginning? It just always existed. That's an act of faith.
Well, then you just push it back to the next time.
Yeah.
And there are some people who are atheists who look at the Big Bang and say, well, this really isn't, there is a Big Bang. We know that. We concede that. But what we think is there is the eternally expanding and then imploding universe. So that what we observed 14.7 billion years ago, or 14.4 billion, was actually just one of many cycles, which are eternal, which goes back to the Aristotelian thesis. The only problem is the data show that the universe is actually accelerating in its expansion. There's no evidence whatsoever of a tendency toward implosion. So this seems to be a one-time in all of creation event.
I heard Carl Sagan say once, famous atheist Carl Sagan, on his Cosmos show, he was trying to deal with this question, and I remember almost word for word. Interestingly enough, it violates no principle of physics to say the material of the Big Bang just spontaneously appeared out of nowhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it sounds like a creator to me. I'd love to find that episode of Cosmos when he said it.
Well, that violates actually one of the cardinal rules in physics, which is that there is no increase or decrease in mass or energy with any transaction. It's transformed, it's changed. But we are living in a universe, we think, where the total amount of energy and matter in the world, in the universe, is fixed. Now there's some assumptions to get to that level, but certainly in all the chemical reactions that we are aware of in our experiments and stuff, we can account for every bit of energy on one side and then on the other side.
I'm leaving you out.
No. For me, though, intelligent creation, when we more and more understand the complexity of the human heart, the complexity of every cell, the complexity of the eyes, the complexity of the entire anatomy, and we're going in the different levels that we could never have imagined even 40, 50 years ago.
At the molecular level and even subatomic level.
Yes. And that this just happened
Yeah.
is an absurdity. That just, this came and evolved how? If there's not some type of intelligence that is helping this along, the more, you speak with a brain surgeon, they go, yeah, that this just happened, our brains, yeah, right.
Well, we're kind of touching the surface of it because we can see some of the reactions, but we can't understand most of the how. But just one other philosophical puzzle here. One of the things that we learn from our experience, although it cannot be proven, is that when you have chaos, complete disorder, it never spontaneously turns to order. That would be like the fun game that I used to play with my family when we were small. We'd set up all these dominoes, across the living room, and we'd have hundreds of them. And then at the right time, you'd push one, and you'd go from perfect order to this chaos because it would all wipe out. It never happens in reverse, except with trick photography. So if there was a moment when there was chaos, when there was no order, and now suddenly we see all the order in the universe that we see, how could that have happened? And notice, none of these questions here, the way we're talking about right now, none of this has to do with the Christian faith. This is just pure logic. And then, one of the great points that Aquinas makes is we can show these ways that indicate that God or a supreme being, a creator, exists. But only by revelation can we know more about God and God's nature, because it's beyond us to know much by just using reason.
I mean, if we want to explain our life now, more than one Big Bang is necessary. Yeah, the Big Bang, the original one, the science accept pretty much, which is now only matter and energy. Then you need a second Big Bang. Where did life come from? Out of matter. I mean, essentially out of rocks. How do you make life out of non-life?
Well, that's the point, from chaos to order.
Something science can't do at all. I remember one was it those experiments? I don't know if it's 18th century or when
They're still going on now.
spontaneous generation where they thought, oh, look at life,
Right.
but they found out that it was coming from bacteria or flies or something,
Right.
believing but their experiment, they cannot create life. You can say these elements are necessary for life, but put them all together and, get the lightning bolt from Victor Frankenstein and hit it, and you know what's going to happen? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing, except maybe blow up the laboratory.
And some of the atheists on this issue they'll concede all those points, but they would say, but the Earth has been around for 4 billion years, and by the time it cooled enough and there was water and chances of mix, this is 3.5 billion years, and over that course of time, even something that's very, 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 very unlikely to happen would happen. And that's a logical fallacy.
Yeah.
Because something that has a very small probability of happening simply has a small probability of happening. You could have an immense amount of time, 20 billion years. There's no certainty that it would ever happen. And so the idea that out of chance life could happen, even things like why is the speed of light constant throughout the universe? There are all these constants that figure into how our universe is derived. Electrons have the same weight everywhere in the universe. Neutrons have the same weight everywhere in the universe. And if they were just off just by a little bit, you wouldn't even have atoms at all.
You wouldn't have a universe. If the four main forces were just even a microscopic percent apart, unbalanced, the universe couldn't exist. It's amazing.
But this is all just chance to the atheists.
Yeah.
Just happened that way. But the reality is, I think, when you look at it and you see these amazing things, you can call them all coincidences. One in a trillion chance.